I'm Rachel Morgan, 35 years old, and last summer I thought my life was finally in place. My design business was thriving, my lakefront house was nearly finished, and my only brother was about to get married. The morning before his big day, I poured a coffee, looked out across the water, and called my Aunt Diane just to double-check the schedule. "I can't wait for tomorrow," I told her with a smile. But on the other end of the line, she went completely silent. Then she said something that made my chest go cold. "Sweetheart, the wedding was last week. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been left out by someone you thought would never forget you." I was born and raised in upstate New York, the kind of town where everybody still waves from the front porch and the local diner remembers your order. My parents, Dennis and Marlene, both worked long hours. Dad ran a small accounting office and Mom worked nights as a nurse, but they raised us with decency and a strong sense of loyalty. Ethan was 3 years older, and from the time I could walk, I followed him everywhere. When Mom and Dad were tied up with shifts and overtime, it was Ethan who taught me how to ride a bike, how to swim, and later how to drive. He wasn't just my big brother. He was my constant, my anchor. As kids, we built forts in the backyard, taped radio shows on cassettes, and made snow tunnels that stretched across the yard. I was shy, especially in middle school, but Ethan always made room for me. When I got braces and the mean girls had their fun, Ethan would walk me home with a comic book in hand and tell me they were just intimidated. I believed him. When I turned 16, he saved up and gave me his old laptop, cleaned up and wrapped in blue tissue paper. "For your future business," he said. Back then, I had no idea just how far I'd take that. I studied interior architecture at a small design college, while Ethan headed off to a top engineering school in Boston. Even though our paths split, we stayed close, regular calls, surprise visits, and long drives to meet halfway when life got busy. After college, Ethan joined a fast-growing tech firm out west, and I moved back home to start at a boutique design agency. I hustled, taking every freelance gig I could find. By 30, I'd saved enough for a down payment on a fixer-upper by the lake, the kind of place people dream about but never actually buy. I made it mine. Every wall, every light fixture, every inch of it told my story. And Ethan, he was the one who first sent me the listing. I remember the day he helped me move in. It was one of the last times we spent alone together. We laughed, unpacked old photos, and even set up the grill on the back porch. He called the place so Rachel and hugged me tighter than usual before he left. A few months later, he called with news he'd met someone. Her name was Sabrina, a marketing exec with a polished voice and flawless timing. I congratulated him, genuinely happy, even as I felt something shift. When I met Sabrina at a dinner with our parents, she smiled like someone who had already decided who I was. She said all the right things, asked all the right questions, but something in her eyes stayed cool. Later, when Ethan stepped away to help clear the table, she leaned in and said, "He really talks about you a lot." The way she said it, it wasn't kind. I tried to brush it off to be welcoming. I invited her to lunch, brought thoughtful birthday gifts, and asked about her work. But over the next year, things started slipping. Texts from Ethan would go unanswered. Plans got canceled. Invites never came. Family dinners shifted without notice. Ethan always had a reason Sabrina had a rough week, or her mom was in town, or he'd simply forgotten. I didn't press. When he called to say they were engaged, I was hopeful. Maybe marriage would ease whatever tension lingered. I congratulated them and told him I was proud. I even showed up early to their engagement dinner with a handmade gift basket full of memories, photos, snacks they loved, even a candle from the shop where they had their first date. Sabrina thanked me with a practiced smile and spent the rest of the evening positioned between me and Ethan like a barrier. When I tried to catch up with him, she cut in always with a new story or an inside joke I didn't recognize. That night, driving home alone, I told myself it was just stress. Wedding planning brought out the worst in people. I'd been around enough brides to know that. I never imagined that the planning would include quietly removing me from Ethan's life piece by piece. But by the time I found out what they'd done, it was already too late. The engagement dinner came just before the first real signs of something being off. I'd put together a gift basket filled with little markers of their relationship wine from their first trip together, candles from the shop where Ethan had bought her birthday gifts, even a framed photo I'd taken of the two of them at a family barbecue. I arrived early, hoping for time with Ethan, but when they showed up, Sabrina stayed glued to his side. She offered me a quick thank you and turned back to Ethan before I could get a full sentence out. Every time I tried to speak with him, she cut in either with a question about the table settings or a laugh about something only the two of them seemed to understand. I watched as she gently pulled him away, always smiling, always polite, but never once giving space for anyone else to reach him. As the dinner wound down, we all took turns offering toasts. When it came to me, I raised my glass and told Ethan how proud I was, how happy I was to see him build something of his own. He mouthed thank you across the table, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. But even that brief connection was broken as Sabrina took his arm and led him out to greet more guests. The next morning, I called Ethan to offer help with the wedding planning. With my work in interior design, I'd built a lot of industry connections and figured I could lend a hand, find a venue, recommend a florist, maybe even help with the invitations. He seemed appreciative, said he'd talk to Sabrina and get back to me, but he never did. A week later, I followed up. His tone was hesitant, a little rushed. Sabrina's roommate from college is already handling most of it, he said, but we'll let you know if something comes up. I let it go, but it stung, especially when I learned through our cousin Caitlin that our Aunt Diane was working directly with the caterer, and our mom was helping with the flowers. Even our cousin Jonah, who'd never shown much interest in weddings, was putting together a playlist for the reception. I kept waiting for a text or call, anything that would include me in the way I'd always been part of Ethan's milestones. But nothing came. Then about 6 months before the wedding, Ethan texted asking to meet for coffee. I remember feeling hopeful that morning, thinking maybe we were turning a corner. We met at a little spot near his office, the kind we used to go to when we were both still figuring out our lives. He looked tired, distracted. After a few minutes of small talk, he finally brought it up. "So we've been finalizing the wedding party," he started, then paused. I waited, giving him space. "Sabrina has her 3 bridesmaids picked out, and I've got 3 groomsmen. We wanted to keep things balanced." The meaning settled slowly heavy. "I wasn't included." "You're not asking me to be part of it," I said. He looked miserable. "I really tried, Rach. I did. But she had her heart set on her friends and—" He trailed off. I nodded. "It's fine." My voice was steady, even though my hands were shaking under the table. "You'll still have a part," he added quickly. "Maybe you could do a reading or help greet guests or something." I told him sure we'd figure it out. We sat in silence for a few minutes, each of us pretending we still had something to say. 3 months later, I got my formal invitation forwarded from my old apartment in the city. Ethan had helped me move into the lake house a year before, but somehow the invite went to my previous address. The new tenant had mailed it to me out of kindness weeks after everyone else had already RSVP'd. When I called to confirm, Ethan seemed surprised to hear from me. "I thought maybe you were upset about the bridesmaid thing," he said. "I hadn't heard back. I just got it yesterday," I told him. "It was sent to the wrong address." "Oh, that's weird." Sabrina handled the mailing list. He promised to tell her. A few days later, my mom mentioned a save-the-date card she'd pinned on the fridge. I never received one. Aunt Diane brought up a wedding website, which I hadn't seen either. When I asked Ethan for the link, he sent it with a short message. "Thought you already had this." At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd been too quiet, too removed. But then I noticed something strange, conflicting details about the date. Ethan had told me the ceremony was June 15th, but during a call, my dad casually mentioned June 8th. I texted Ethan to double-check. He replied hours later, "Yep, the 15th." Dad must be confused. As the date approached, something shifted in the air. My calls to Mom went to voicemail more often. Dad's messages turned short. Aunt Diane, who usually checked in weekly, stopped calling altogether. I figured it was wedding stress, tried to stay optimistic. I focused instead on finishing my wedding gift, a photo album I was designing myself. Page by page, I told Ethan's story. Childhood pictures, notes I'd written him over the years, even old scanned birthday cards. I poured myself into that album, hoping it would remind him of the bond we once had. The night before, what I believed was the wedding, I stayed up late adding finishing touches. On Friday morning, I called Aunt Diane to confirm what time I should arrive at the venue. "I can't wait for tomorrow," I told her, excited. "It's going to be beautiful." There was a long pause. Then her voice came low and hesitant. "Rachel, the wedding was last week." I laughed, certain she'd misunderstood. "No, it's tomorrow, Saturday the 15th. "No, sweetheart. It was on the 8th, last Saturday." I stood frozen in my kitchen, staring at nothing. "That can't be right," I said. "Ethan told me the 15th. I have the invitation." I grabbed the envelope from my desk and pulled it out. My eyes landed on the date, printed clearly across the middle. June 8th. I couldn't breathe. "You must have gotten the update," Aunt Diane said. "They changed it months ago. There was an email that went out." I opened my laptop, hands trembling, and scrolled through my inbox. Buried in my spam folder was an auto-generated email from a wedding platform dated 2 weeks before. The subject line read, "Updated wedding information." Not from Ethan, not from Sabrina, not even a text, just a bulk email. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Did Ethan get married last weekend?" I asked. "Yes, honey. Wasn't it a beautiful ceremony?" My voice cracked. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why wasn't I there? "We assumed you knew. Everyone else did. I didn't get any update," I said. "No call, no text, nothing." There was a pause. "Maybe check your spam folder." I hung up and stared at the screen, unable to move. Dozens of photos had started flooding Facebook and Instagram. Family members posing in pastel dresses and suits, smiling beneath flower arches, toasting with champagne. There was Ethan dancing with Sabrina, my parents standing proudly beside them, Aunt Diane with Uncle Mitch cousins I hadn't seen in years. Even Grandma Elise had flown in from Arizona. Everyone was there, everyone except me. And somehow, not one of them had noticed I was missing. The next thing I remember was standing in my living room holding the photo album I'd spent weeks building. On the dining table, my unopened dress still lay in its box tag attached. My phone rang. It was my dad. I answered without thinking. "There must have been a mix-up," he said. "We thought maybe you were upset and decided not to come." "Upset?" I asked. "What reason would I have to miss Ethan's wedding?" He hesitated. "Ethan said he'd tried calling you. I pulled up my phone records. No missed calls, no messages." And then I opened Instagram. There it was. A post from Sabrina, a video of the wedding highlights. In the caption, she wrote, "The perfect intimate celebration with only those who truly matter. Only those who truly matter." That's when it hit me, not just the exclusion, but the intent behind it. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be deliberately erased. The rest of that weekend passed in a blur. I stayed inside the lake house with my phone silenced and the blinds drawn. Photos kept showing up on social media, cousins I hadn't seen in years, smiling next to Ethan and Sabrina. My parents beaming beside the cake, Even old family friends I didn't know were still in touch. No one had reached out. No one had asked where I was. Late that Sunday evening, my phone finally rang. It was Dad. I answered, hoping for an explanation, something that would make the last few days make sense. But he launched right into it, saying Mom had told him what happened, that it must have been some kind of miscommunication. He said, maybe I should have spoken up sooner if I'd felt left out, that everyone had just assumed I wasn't coming. I asked him why no one had called the day of the wedding when I didn't show up. He said Ethan told them I must have changed my mind. I pulled up my phone log again after the call ended. There were no missed calls, no texts, no emails, nothing but the automated wedding update buried in my spam folder. The next morning, I opened Instagram again. I found Sabrina's profile and scrolled through her recent posts. 3 days earlier, she had shared a highlight reel, slow-motion clips of the ceremony guests clapping her walking down the aisle. The caption read, "A perfect day with the people who truly matter." I sat there with the laptop glowing in my lap and the wedding album I'd made still sitting on the table unopened. I had spent hours curating those photos, every birthday, every vacation, every milestone Ethan and I had shared. On the cover was a picture of us as kids playing in the backyard, our parents blurred in the background. I had added a caption under it, "Building Memories Since 1988. The irony sat heavy in my chest. The dress I'd ordered for the wedding was still hanging in the closet tags, untouched. That afternoon, I left a voicemail on Ethan's phone, the only way I could think to reach him. I told him I'd seen the photos, that I didn't understand, that I needed him to call me. He didn't. Instead, I spent the rest of the week moving through a kind of quiet haze. I canceled a few meetings, turned off email, and let my business partner handle incoming client calls. I didn't want to explain anything. I didn't have the words for it yet. I just kept going over the timeline in my head, when the wedding date changed, when the email was sent, when the photos went up. The clearest memory from those days was standing barefoot in my kitchen late at night, staring out the dark window. I'd gotten up to check the lock on the back door and just stood there, unable to shake the feeling that something had quietly shifted. The people I thought would always show up for me hadn't, and not just that they hadn't noticed I was gone. On Thursday, I received a call from Mom. Her voice was gentle at first, trying to ease into the conversation. She said she understood I was upset, but that I couldn't hold the whole family responsible for a mistake. I asked her again if she had known about the date change. She admitted she had. "We thought you'd gotten the email," she said, "and when we didn't hear from you, we figured maybe you were taking space." I reminded her that I had RSVP'd late, only because the original invite went to the wrong address, that Ethan had told me the date was still the 15th when I asked. There was a pause on the line before she offered a soft sigh and said, "I guess we just didn't know what to say." The silence on my end must have said enough, because she didn't follow up with anything more. I didn't hear from Ethan until the following Monday. He texted, "Hey, sorry, things have been hectic. Can we talk?" I told him I'd prefer to speak in person. We agreed to meet at his apartment later that afternoon. Sabrina opened the door when I arrived. Her expression didn't shift much, just a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rachel," she said flatly, "we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I said. "You haven't been expecting me for a while now." Ethan appeared behind her holding a mug. He looked tired, a little caught off guard. I didn't wait for an invitation. I stepped inside and looked around. The place was still cluttered with wedding gifts and leftover decorations. Thank you cards were scattered across the table. I turned to Ethan. Why, I asked. "Why didn't you want me there?" Sabrina crossed her arms. "We sent you the update. The email went out 2 weeks before." I looked straight at Ethan. "And you never followed up. You never made sure I saw it. You never even noticed when I didn't respond." "We were busy," he said quietly. "There was a lot going on. You were too busy to notice your sister wasn't at your wedding." My voice cracked a little, but I steadied it. Too busy to care. Sabrina's voice came sharp behind him. I've never felt comfortable around you, Rachel. You and Ethan have this bond that always made me feel like I was intruding. I blinked. So the solution was to cut me out entirely. Ethan stepped in. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. The change of date, the logistics, I stopped him. Please don't lie. Not now. He rubbed his face, finally letting the mask drop. Sabrina thought it would be easier. She was worried you'd try to take over like you always do. I turned to her. When have I ever done that? You insert yourself. You think everything needs your input. I looked back at Ethan, and you agreed. He didn't answer. I stepped back, feeling the distance between us grow wider than it ever had before. The room felt too still, like something irreversible had taken place in it. Before I could say more, the doorbell rang. Ethan opened it to find our parents standing there. Mom looked surprised to see me. We thought we might find you here, she said. Dad gave me a quick nod. We've been trying to call. I didn't respond. You were missing from all the photos Mom added. People noticed. We thought you'd chosen not to come. You thought wrong, I said. And you never checked. Not once. Dad tried to smooth it over. Ethan said you got the update. That's what we were told. I pulled out my phone and showed them my inbox, my texts, my call log. Show me where. Show me one real message that says, we changed the date. They couldn't. No one could. As we all stood there in that crowded room, it hit me for the first time, not just that they had excluded me, but that no one had fought to make sure I was included. That realization didn't come with shouting or tears. It came with quiet, with the final click of a door that no one remembered to hold open. And from that moment on, everything changed. For 2 weeks after that day in Ethan and Sabrina's apartment, I didn't return calls. I let texts pile up unchecked. The lake house, which had always been a space of peace, felt too still now, like the walls had absorbed the silence left behind. I spent entire afternoons in the guest room, the one with the old bookshelf we'd moved together, just sitting with the blinds drawn and the album unopened on the bed. My phone buzzed with missed calls from my parents, then from Ethan, then from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer any of them. The only people I let through were my closest friends Tessa and Renee, who showed up uninvited with takeout blankets and a stack of those feel-good mystery movies we used to watch in college. Tessa set the food on the table without saying a word and sat beside me on the couch. Renee didn't ask questions either. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask you to perform just to be. That first night, I didn't talk much. I barely touched the food. But the second night, after a few sips of wine, it all came out: the missed invitation, the fake date, the voicemail no one returned. They listened, heads tilted, hands clasped. When I finished, neither of them rushed to fix it. Tessa finally just said, "That's not something you get over in a weekend." Renee added, "You're not being dramatic, you're grieving." And she was right. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but that was what it was. A slow, rolling grief, not just for the wedding I'd missed, but for the version of my brother I'd been holding on to, the one who used to make peanut butter sandwiches when I had nightmares, who once drove 3 hours just to fix a flat tire I was too afraid to change alone. That brother hadn't been around for a long time. I just hadn't been ready to see it. At Renee's suggestion, I started journaling. Not long entries, just fragments, memories, feelings, questions I wasn't ready to say aloud. I found myself flipping through old photos, rereading texts, digging into years of moments I had brushed aside. The pattern was clearer than I'd ever admitted: the holiday invitations that reached me late, the group texts that excluded me, the birthday dinners I learned about from social media. I remembered Thanksgiving 2 years ago when Sabrina told me dinner was at 7. I arrived to find dessert already on the table, or Dad's retirement party last spring where my invitation had supposedly been lost in the shuffle. I'd shown up just in time to help clean up. Each time I had accepted the explanation. I had made excuses for them, because I'd told myself family meant patience, not questions. Eventually, I reached out to Dr. Keller, a therapist I'd seen briefly after a breakup 5 years earlier. She remembered me immediately and offered an appointment the next day. During that first session, I described everything from the engagement dinner all the way to the confrontation in Ethan's apartment. Dr. Keller listened carefully, jotting things down now and then, but mostly just letting the story breathe. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly and said, "This is more common than you think. Sometimes when a new partner feels threatened by an existing bond, they push for distance. But the more important question is, why was your brother willing to let it happen?" I hadn't thought of it that way before. I had focused so much on Sabrina's role, on the things she had done or said, that I hadn't turned the lens on Ethan's choices. "I always forgave him," I said quietly. "Every missed call, every canceled plan." "And what did that teach him?" she asked. "That there were no consequences." I left that session feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of clarity, however faint. That weekend, I returned to my studio and picked up a few smaller design jobs. I met with clients again, slowly stepped back into a routine. There was comfort in solving other people's problems, deciding on paint colors, selecting light fixtures, rearranging floor plans. They were things that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. They didn't unravel on you halfway through. I also started spending more time outside. I cleaned up the garden beds, replaced a broken fence post, even re-stained the deck. There was something grounding about being back in motion. One afternoon, I moved the wedding album off the dining table and shelved it without opening it. I didn't throw it away, but I no longer felt the need to keep it in sight. During that time, I also began reflecting on something I hadn't wanted to admit. Sabrina's resentment may not have been just about Ethan and me. It may have had something to do with my life. The business I'd built, the lake house I owned, outright the clients whose names Sabrina had once name-dropped during dinner. Her comments, always dressed up as compliments, carried a quiet edge. "It must be so fun to decorate for a living," she once said. "I wish I had that kind of flexibility." I thought back to the time I offered to connect her with a public relations agency I'd worked with. She declined. Later that year, I overheard her tell someone at a family gathering that she didn't need charity referrals from Rachel's lifestyle contacts. That moment had slipped by me, then brushed off as stress or insecurity. Now I saw it for what it was. The clearest realization came one morning while cleaning out the upstairs hall closet. I found a box of things Ethan had given me over the years, notes a mix CD he made when we were teenagers, a sweatshirt from a college visit. I sat on the floor with it for over an hour. When I finally stood up, I didn't feel angry. I just felt different, like something had quietly finished shifting into place. A week later, I got a message from Aunt Diane. She asked if she could stop by. Unlike everyone else, she hadn't pushed, hadn't left long voicemails, or tried to smooth things over with passive sympathy. When she arrived, she brought tea and banana bread and no agenda. We sat in the kitchen for a while, and when I was ready, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said I saw it happening. I should have said something, but I told myself it wasn't my place. "Why didn't you?" I asked. She hesitated. "Family dynamics are complicated. I didn't want to cause more trouble. But when I saw your face that morning when you realized you'd missed the wedding, I knew I'd let you down by staying quiet." There was a long pause before she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Some actions require consequences," she said, "even in families, especially in families." That night I sat on the deck with a blanket around my shoulders and her words still circling in my mind. I watched the sun slip behind the trees and felt something shift inside me again, not a hard edge, but a quiet resolve. I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could decide how I wanted to move forward from it. The lake house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine again. A month passed without a word from Ethan. Then out of the blue, his name lit up on my phone screen. I let it ring twice before answering. His tone was cheerful. Too cheerful, like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. "Hey, Rachel," he said. "How have you been?" "I've been fine," I said carefully. "What's going on?" There was a pause, then a breath. "Well, Sabrina and I were talking. We never really got to celebrate with extended family after the wedding. The honeymoon was so quick and we didn't want to wait too long. We're thinking about doing something casual." I waited, already sensing what was coming. "And we thought, your lake house would be perfect." I didn't answer right away. He rushed to fill the silence. "Just 40 or so people, mostly family and close friends. You know how beautiful your place is this time of year. Everyone's always talking about it. Sabrina's already got some cute decoration ideas." "You want to host your wedding celebration here?" I said, making sure I heard him correctly. "Yeah, I mean, you've got the space. And the view over the lake would be incredible for photos." I leaned against the kitchen counter, holding the phone tightly. "When were you planning to tell me?" "Well, we were going to talk sooner, but you've been hard to reach. And Sabrina's been working on the guest list. She wants to send out invites this week, so people already think it's happening here." He hesitated. "We might have floated the idea. Everyone's excited. It would really mean a lot." I looked out the window at the yard I had landscaped by hand, the deck I had rebuilt one board at a time. "No," I said. "You can't use the lake house." There was a long pause. "Wait, what? No, Ethan. You can't host your party here." His voice dropped. "Rachel, come on. Don't be like this. This is a way for you to be part of the celebration of a wedding I wasn't invited to." He sighed. "It was a miscommunication." It wasn't. My voice stayed even. It was a decision. "And this is mine." "Fine," he snapped. "We'll figure out something else. But Mom and Dad are going to be really disappointed." It didn't take long for the calls to start. First, Mom, her voice already on edge. "Rachel, your brother just called. I cannot believe you're refusing to help. This is family." "Hello to you too," I said, not bothering to hide the weariness in my voice. "You're being petty. Yes, there was an unfortunate situation, but punishing everyone doesn't solve anything." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm setting a boundary. My home isn't available, but it would mean so much. Did my presence at the wedding mean that much?" I asked. That ended the conversation. Dad called next, then Aunt Diane, who surprised me by offering quiet support. "They have a lot of nerve," she said plainly. "Stand your ground." The following 2 days were filled with texts from cousins, voicemails from family friends, and one message from a second cousin I barely knew asking what had happened. Some people understood. Others pressured me to be the bigger person. On the third day, Ethan called again. His tone had changed. "This is ridiculous," he started. "Everyone's upset because you're being difficult." "I'm not being difficult. I'm making a choice. This isn't like the wedding." "No," I said. "That was about your day. This is about my home." There was a long silence. Then softer. "Remember when we were kids? We promised we'd always show up for each other." I closed my eyes. "And I did, Ethan. Over and over. But promises only mean something when they go both ways." That night, Mom and Dad showed up at my front door. "We raised you better than this," Mom said the moment I let them in. "Family comes first." I guided them to the kitchen table. "Yes. And that's why it hurt so much when you all celebrated without me." Dad leaned forward. "We've apologized." "What more do you want, honesty?" I said. "I want someone to finally admit it wasn't a mistake, that it wasn't a mix-up. I want respect, that's all." Mom folded her arms. "This is about the lake house, isn't it? You want to remind everyone that you earned this, that you did it on your own." "No," I said quietly. "This is about consequences. I was excluded from your celebration, and now I'm choosing not to participate in the one you want from me." "So that's it?" Dad asked. "You're walking away from the family." "I'm setting a boundary," I said. "There's a difference." They left a short while later. Mom was teary. Dad didn't say goodbye. The next morning I sat down and wrote an email. Not a long one, just a clear message sent to the entire family. I told them I cared for each of them, that I valued connection. But that respect was not optional, and I wouldn't continue to accept being treated like an afterthought. My home would not be used for the post-wedding celebration. And if anyone wanted to rebuild something real with me, I was open to it, but only if it started from a place of honesty. Then I turned off my phone, brewed a fresh cup of coffee, and walked down to the dock. There wasn't any guilt in my chest, just space. The family divided quickly after the email. Some stayed quiet. Others offered quiet support. Aunt Diane called later that night, telling me she was proud of how I handled it. My cousins Caitlin and Jonah texted the next day with short, thoughtful messages. Jonah said he wished he'd spoken up sooner. Caitlin admitted she'd noticed how things had shifted over the past few years, but didn't know how to bring it up. I didn't hear much from my parents at first. A few strained calls came through, mostly from Mom, saying things like, "Maybe we all just need a little space." I let the calls go to voicemail. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about stepping back. Ethan and Sabrina hosted their post-wedding gathering at a restaurant downtown. I only found out because Caitlin called me that afternoon. "You're not missing anything," she said. "The food's mediocre, and Sabrina keeps talking about how it was their backup plan." I thanked her and went back to sanding the back porch railing, a project I'd been meaning to get to for months. There was no anger in me, just a low, steady sense of distance. Not coldness exactly, just acceptance. I wasn't part of that version of the family anymore. The weeks that followed were quiet in a different way. I leaned into my work, took on a few new design clients, and started volunteering at a local architecture program for high school students. I began hosting Sunday brunches again just for close friends and a few neighbors. Tessa and Renee became regulars. Aunt Diane came by one afternoon with a basket of fresh herbs from her garden and stayed for tea on the deck. I also started seeing more of Zoe, my business partner, and the two of us spent evenings sketching out ideas for a new eco-build project. She introduced me to a few people in her circle, and slowly, my social life began to feel fuller in ways I hadn't expected. These weren't obligation-driven gatherings. There were no undercurrents or shifting dynamics, just people who wanted to be there. That summer, I hosted a small dinner at the lake house. 10 people, total clients turned friends, neighbors, and Zoe's partner. We grilled vegetables on the deck, passed around a salad of backyard tomatoes, and watched the sun set over the water with glasses of wine in hand. It wasn't flashy or planned far in advance. It was just kind. 3 months after the wedding, Mom reached out again. "Your dad and I have been talking," she said, her voice softer than usual. "We may have been too quick to dismiss how you felt. I think we didn't want to believe we had failed you. We made plans to meet halfway for lunch the following week. It was awkward at first, like everyone was walking across a frozen lake, careful not to crack the surface. But partway through the meal, Mom set down her fork and looked across the table. "I knew something wasn't right," she said. "I didn't like how the invitation was handled, but I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Why not, I asked." She shook her head. "Because I didn't want to push Ethan away. He's always been the quieter one. Sabrina's strong-willed, and I thought, maybe if I'd just let it go, things would settle." I nodded slowly. "So you sacrificed your relationship with me to keep peace with them?" She blinked at that. "I never thought of it that way. I always forgave it," I said, "until I couldn't anymore." "I'm sorry," she whispered. It wasn't everything I needed to hear, but it was the beginning. Dad didn't come to that first lunch, but a few weeks later, the three of us met again. He was quieter, arms folded across his chest for most of the meal. Toward the end, he finally spoke. "I'm not good at conflict," he said plainly. "I thought if we just moved on, it would pass." "Some things don't," I replied. He nodded once. "I see that now." I didn't press them for more. I didn't need them to relive every moment. I just needed them to stop pretending it hadn't happened. That was all. Ethan didn't reach out until 5 months after the wedding. A short text. "Can we talk?" We met at a small coffee shop just off Main Street. He looked different. Tired, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Sabrina and I are in counseling," he said. I raised my eyebrows slightly. She struggles with control, and I let her take over a lot of things, more than I should have. I said nothing, waiting. The counselor asked us to go back through the wedding planning, every decision, every change. And when we got to you, I realized I'd convinced myself it was easier to just let things happen, that if I didn't push back, I wouldn't have to face what it meant. He glanced down at his coffee. "You were right. I didn't fight for you, and I'm sorry." When he finally looked up, his eyes were steady. "I miss my sister." I didn't answer right away. The noise from the street outside filled the space between us. "I miss my brother too," I said, "but it's going to take time." "I understand." We started small after that. A few texts, a short call about a new design software he thought I'd like. He sent a book recommendation. I replied with a photo of a sunset over the lake. When Thanksgiving came around, I hosted dinner for a small group, just friends, Aunt Diane, and a few neighbors. Ethan wasn't there. Neither were my parents. But that night, as I stood by the sink, drying glasses with Renee, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Stillness. Not the empty kind, but the kind that lets you breathe. 1 year after the wedding, I decided to host a family dinner at the lake house. It wasn't a grand event, just a quiet evening with the people who had shown up in the months since everything fell apart. Aunt Diane arrived first with a fresh pie. Caitlin and Jonah followed carrying folding chairs and a bottle of wine. My parents came a little later, both dressed in muted tones, their expressions softer than I'd seen in a while. Ethan and Sabrina were last to arrive. He greeted everyone with a careful smile. She stayed close behind him, quieter than usual. Her eyes scanned the room as if trying to find the safest place to land. I led them both out to the deck, where a long table was set beneath hanging lights. The lake shimmered in the background, still and steady. We ate slowly, passing plates and sharing stories that stayed mostly on the surface work, travel small updates. The air held a politeness that felt both fragile and necessary. At one point, Dad offered a toast. It was simple. He said he was glad to see everyone together again, even if it had taken a while. No one raised their glass immediately. Then Aunt Diane did, and the rest followed. After dessert, I brought out coffee, and we moved to the outdoor seating area. The temperature had dropped slightly, so a few of us grabbed blankets from the basket near the door. The lights above us cast a warm glow, and for a few minutes it felt like something close to normal. That's when my youngest cousin Ellie, just 17, turned to me with a question. "How did you do it?" she asked. "Stand up to everyone when they were all telling you to give in." The table quieted. I glanced around, taking in the faces watching me, some curious, some a little uncomfortable. I realized, I said slowly, that respecting myself had to matter as much as being respected by others. And sometimes that means making a choice people won't understand. Ellie nodded, her brow drawn. "My friends get upset when I say no to stuff, even little things. I'm always afraid they'll stop talking to me. The people who care about you will hear you even if it takes them a while," I told her. "The ones who don't might not be your people after all." She didn't say anything else, but when she hugged me goodbye later, it was tight and deliberate. As the evening wound down, people started collecting dishes and folding napkins. Caitlin offered to help load the dishwasher. Mom quietly wiped down the counters while I packed leftovers into containers. Ethan lingered near the sliding door, watching the reflection of the lights in the glass. When most of the guests had left, he approached me. "Thanks for inviting us," he said. "You're welcome," I replied. Sabrina stood a few feet behind him, arms folded. She looked like she wanted to say something but hadn't decided whether it was worth the effort. Eventually, she stepped forward. "I'm sorry," she said, voice low, "for how things were handled." I nodded once. "Thank you." It wasn't warm, and it wasn't forced, just a small step across the distance that still remained. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine and a blanket around my shoulders. The lake was quiet. The stars reflected off the water in uneven patterns. I thought about the girl I'd been a year ago, frantic, heartbroken, staring at wedding photos on her laptop screen in an empty house. I thought about the version of myself who would have hosted that party anyway, just to keep everyone happy. That person wasn't gone, not completely. But she had learned something. Boundaries don't close doors. They set the frame for what stays inside. After everyone left that night, I rinsed the last coffee cups and stood by the open door, letting the quiet come back. The lake held the lights like a steady mirror. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Ethan read, "Thank you for tonight. Could we take a walk tomorrow? Just us." We met mid-morning and followed the path along the water. He kept his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was bracing for a cold wind. "Counseling has been humbling," he said. "I can't fix the past, but I can stop asking you to carry it." I listened. When he finished, I told him what I needed going forward. Direct communication, no more triangulating through Mom or anyone else, and time together that wasn't managed by anyone but us. He nodded, eyes wet but clear. "I can do that," he said. "I want to earn this." Back at the house, I pulled the wedding album from the shelf for the first time since I'd made it. I turned each page, letting the photos breathe muddy sneakers in the driveway, his first computer on the kitchen table, a sunburned smile at the beach. I slipped a note into the back pocket, "When we're both ready." Then I returned the album to its place. It didn't feel like a surrender. It felt like a promise to myself. The next week, Mom called to ask if she could stop by alone. She set a covered dish on the counter and without preamble said, "I should have called you the morning of the wedding. I should have called you every hour until I heard your voice." We stood there in the kitchen with the afternoon light on the floor, and for the first time in a long time, I believed she understood. A few days later, Dad came to help replace a loose board on the dock. We worked side by side, measuring twice, drilling once, saying little, and meaning it all. Sabrina sent a short email. No elaborate explanation, no deflection. Just, "I'm sorry for my part, and I know a real apology is what happens next." I didn't reply right away. When I did, I kept it simple. "Thank you." My boundary stands. It was enough for that day. Life filled in around the edges. Sunday brunches kept their easy rhythm. Tessa arguing with Renee about whether the lemon bars needed more zest. Aunt Diane bringing bundles of herbs that perfumed the whole deck. Zoe and I finished the eco-build proposal and celebrated with hamburgers on paper plates. Ellie texted to say she told her friends she couldn't pick up another project for their club. They didn't love it, she wrote, but they heard me. I smiled at the screen and sent back a thumbs up and a heart. One evening near dusk, Ethan and I sat on the steps with 2 mugs of tea and watched a heron lift off from the reeds. "You know," he said, "I used to think peace meant avoiding hard conversations." He took a slow breath. "It turns out peace is what happens after you have them." I didn't answer. We just sat there, heat from the cups warming our palms, the day easing into night. I won't pretend the hurt vanished. It softened into something that didn't dictate every room I walked into. Justice didn't arrive with a speech or a scene. It came as a boundary that held as honesty, that stayed put as small repairs done with steady hands. Dignity wasn't loud. It was quiet and persistent, like the lake breathing against the shore. If there's anything I carry forward, it's this: love that requires you to disappear is not love. The people meant for you may falter, but they show up to repair, and they learn the language of your boundaries without asking you to translate. Family can be born, and it can be built. Both count when they are tended with respect. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If you've had to draw a hard line to protect your peace, I hope you'll share what you learned. And if this story met you where you are, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and pass it along to someone who might need the reminder that their worth belongs to them.